Okay, so today's Lunch and Learn is going to be about navigating difficult conversations, specifically around task performance. So the objectives are going to be to understand different communication styles, to be able to identify barriers to effective communication, and to learn concrete tools and techniques for effective communication. Before we learn about the different types of communication, I'm going to ask, what is communication? Folks can write in the chat or come off mute and share how they would define communication.
This where your
This is the presentation. Yep.
is?
Yeah. I'm also, it's hybrid. So are you?
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna move slightly so that folks who join in person can also see the screen. You can sit down anywhere. Thanks for coming in person. Yeah. All right, did anyone want to share what their definition of communication was?
In the chat, we have, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Lay, make people know what we are talking about. And then Brandon shares exchange of information, and Sandra says interaction between two or more persons.
Yes, all of those things. All of those things. And there are different forms of communication. There's written communication, there's verbal communication, body language can be seen as a form of communication, visual communication, and just listening is also communication. Now we're going to talk about communication styles. I'm not sure if any of you have come across these terms before or are familiar, but the different communication styles are passive, passive-aggressive, aggressive, and assertive. Passive communication is when somebody fails to express honest feelings, thoughts, or beliefs, or they do so in a very apologetic manner that others can easily disregard what they're sharing, or can often lead to somebody being ignored or not having their needs met. Aggressive communication is kind of what it sounds like. It's when somebody is insensitive, they're abrasive, they're not opening to hearing others' opinions or ideas. It's very demanding. It can feel very hostile. It can also feel very dominating, competitive, or pressured. Then there's passive aggressive, which is a mix of both. And there might be an expression of aggressive feelings, but in an indirect way. This can look like sarcasm. It can look like ignoring somebody, or it can look like deliberately doing something to, hurt somebody's feelings or make somebody have a negative response to something instead of directly saying what they feel. Okay. Assertive communication, this is what we want. We want to be able to communicate assertively. We want to be able to express our feelings, thoughts, and needs in a direct manner, but also in a respectful manner. I'm gonna give some examples of each here. So passive communication, for example, if somebody says, I wouldn't mind taking on a bit less this month. But what they actually mean is, I'm very overwhelmed and, hey, can I actually take on a bit less this month? Is it possible for me to only have 20 clients this week instead of 40, right? They're feeling overwhelmed. They're trying to express their need, but they're not really doing so in a direct way. An example of aggressive communication would be a supervisor or a manager saying, I can't believe you missed the deadline. Do you even care about this job? In front of people, not in front of people, there's yelling. There's a very accusatory tone. Passive aggressive, an example for that would be maybe an employee is upset. They've been left out of a meeting, or maybe there was an impromptu meeting they weren't around for, and they send out an email to the team saying, "Thanks for keeping me in the loop." Right? This person obviously had some unexpressed feelings. Instead of saying, "Hey, I really wish that I was able to make that meeting," or expressing however they felt about not being able to miss that meeting, they did so in an indirect way and in a sarcastic way. An example of assertive communication would be, "I understand the project is important, but I'm currently at capacity with my workload. Can we discuss priorities or get additional support to be able to meet a deadline?" This person is expressing their need. They're being honest and saying, "Hey, I'm kind of at my capacity." They're asking for what they need. They're being respectful and not just saying, "I have too much on my plate, I can't do it." They're trying to come up with a resolution together. That would be an example of assertive communication. Barriers to assertive communication, because as much as we all want to have assertive communication, it can be challenging. And some of the barriers to assertive communication are fear. It can be very frightening or scary to advocate for yourself or express what you want. Sometimes folks don't have the skills to do so. They've never learned assertive communication skills. Or they've learned how to be passive aggressive through a parent, through a sibling, through a workplace culture. It can also be cultural beliefs about assertiveness. Assertiveness may be seen as negative or may be seen as something that only particular people in different positions are able to be. Childhood experiences, trauma, and anxiety can also be barriers to assertive communication. Assertiveness can help with hard conversations. One way to remember how to have assertive communication is to keep in mind the acronym HARD, which is honest, appropriate, respectful, and direct. For passive communication or non-assertive communication, it can be appropriate and respectful. The person can be timid, they can be reserved and not wanting to upset the other person, but it's often not honest and it's not direct. Aggressive communication is blunt, sometimes very direct and honest, but not always respectful or appropriate. So we want to be assertive in our communication. We want to be honest, appropriate, respectful, and direct. Honest. Saying what you mean, communicating truthfully and transparently about your thoughts and expectations. I need more time to complete this project effectively. If you need more time, it's important to share that information. I'm feeling overwhelmed with the current workload and need to prioritize tasks to be able to maintain quality. I made an error in the report. This is really hard sometimes to be able to admit mistakes and error, but being honest is a part of being assertive. I made an error and I'm already taking steps to correct it and to ensure that it doesn't happen again. I don't understand. Can you please repeat that? I wanna stop and reiterate the importance of letting people know when you don't understand and checking for understanding, checking for clarity. Because oftentimes people will say, "Do you understand? Are you following?" "Yes." And then the person leaves the meeting and they go and maybe they misremembered something or they misinterpreted something or they wrote down a wrong number. And that can cause a lot of complications. So it's okay if you don't understand something. It doesn't mean that you're not smart. It doesn't mean that you're not capable. It just means you don't understand. So asking, hey, I actually don't understand, can you repeat that? Can you try to explain that in a slightly different way? Because it's really important in communication for you to be understanding what the other person is saying to you. Appropriate. So the A in the hard conversation acronym is appropriate. And this is really about tailoring the communication to suit the context, the audience, and the situation. Not all conversations are going to go the same way. Not all conversations are going to look the same or sound the same, because context matters, audience matters, and situations matter. And I'll use an example. For this presentation, if I'm doing this for another department, let's say dining services or, you know, another school, the examples I use might be slightly different. The topics I talk about might be slightly different because of the context, the audience, and the situation, okay? And today we're specifically talking about task performance, so that the examples that I'm using are about task performance, but the acronym HARD can be used for all kinds of assertive communication. So some examples of making sure that folks are staying appropriate in communication is to ensure we cover everything. Let's focus on the current performance objectives and how we can continue to meet and exceed them. If we set up a meeting to talk about, let's say, our performance review, but other topics seem to be coming up, which sometimes do when folks meet, to say, hey, you know what? It's important that we talk about that, but this meeting is for this. Let's make sure that we're covering that topic today. I appreciate your feedback from the meeting today. I want to acknowledge what you shared. I think it's better suited for its own conversation. Could we schedule a one-on-one to dive deeper into the details? Right? You don't have to ignore that the person said something. You don't have to make a comment like, that's not what we're talking about right now. You can say, hey, I heard you. I do want to talk to you about this. This is kind of what we're focusing on right now. Let's schedule another meeting to discuss that. It sounds like you have some great ideas for another project. We can schedule a separate meeting to discuss that topic specifically. Again, same kind of thing. And then I've allotted 30 minutes for our conversation. This is an example. If you're talking to somebody about something and another topic seems to be coming into the meeting, hey, I only allotted 30 minutes for this conversation. We can use the first 10 minutes to discuss your concerns, or we can schedule another meeting. Which would you prefer? That's respectful, that's appropriate, and that's honest, okay? Some helpful tips about making sure that a conversation stays appropriate. Agendas can be really helpful. If you have 30 minutes or you have an hour meeting, what are we going to talk about? I started the presentation with objectives. That could be another way to really make sure this is what we're meeting for and these are the topics that we're going to discuss. Consistent meeting structures can also be helpful too. If this is a supervisory meeting that you have weekly or bi-weekly, and maybe you start the first 5 minutes are just general check-ins, the second 5 minutes are, is there anything you want to talk about today? This is what I have. Maybe you're reviewing the agenda. Having a consistent structure can really help ensure that the conversation stays appropriate. And then lastly, time management. Okay, 20 agenda items for a 30-minute meeting, probably not going to happen. But knowing how much time you have set aside for this meeting, being realistic about the expectations around what can actually be covered, and managing your time appropriately. So if you see, oh, we only have 5 minutes left, let's take this topic and schedule a follow-up meeting to go over it. I'm going to pause here. I know I've gone over a bunch of information so far and just ask if anybody has questions. And if you're on Zoom, you can feel free to write in the chat or take yourself off mute and ask a question.
I think it'd be helpful to think about how to
foster our direct reports being able to feel like they can have assertive conversations and not just passive ones or something like that. So
Yeah, is it okay if I go through the rest of the?
yes,
Okay.
sorry, I was just thinking about
No
that.
problem, yeah. Yeah. Are you able to think of like a example? And you don't have to tell me now, but maybe.
Yes.
Okay, we'll circle back. All right, thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Respectful. I think this one is pretty self-explanatory, but being respectful is valuing the perspectives and expressing your viewpoints in a way with consideration and courtesy. Recognizing that people are gonna have different opinions. You're not always gonna agree with somebody's opinion. That's okay. It really is important that you're respectful. I understand your perspective and I appreciate your feedback. Let's collaborate to find a solution that meets both of our needs. I respect your expertise in this area and would love your guidance on how we can enhance our project outcomes. Although I don't agree with that approach, I'm willing to follow your lead on this. You can disagree respectfully, and that disagreeing with people is a part of life. It's gonna happen. We're all not the same person and we all think differently. Direct. Trying to be as clear and succinct in conveying your message as possible. Trying to reduce ambiguity. To improve our workflow, I need the updated data by Friday afternoon. This is very concrete. Like, I need this by Friday. Whenever you have the time, at your earliest convenience, when you get a second. Those are not clear or concrete. I need this by the end of the day to prepare for tomorrow's presentation. Can you confirm if that's feasible? I know I'm saying that I need this, but I would also like for you to say, I can do that, I can't do that, because if you can't do that, we might need to readjust. Let's focus on finishing the top 3 priorities today so we can meet our deadline. Can we confirm we're on the same page about what the 3 priorities are? What are the 3 things we want to focus on? Making sure that you are understanding each other and on the same page. The expected turnaround time for this is 2 days. If you need more time, please communicate that to me by close of business tomorrow. Again, I'm saying, hey, listen, if you can't get to it, that's okay, but please communicate. That kind of answers your question earlier too about the assertive. How do you kind of help foster that? Creating an opening to say, if you can't, that's okay, but also it's important for you to communicate that to me as well. Other important steps in assertive communication is communicating what you think about the performance without being accusatory. It really seems like you don't care. Accusatory. You know, you're really slipping. Accusatory. Hey, I've noticed that things have been coming in a little bit later. You used to turn this around in a week. You've been submitting this in about 10 days. I'm noticing this change, but trying to really be concrete in what you're noticing. If you are going to express how you feel, make sure that it's a feelings, again, and not accusatory. Informing somebody about how the behavior affects the work, again, appropriate in context, being able to make sure that it's concrete and relevant to what you're talking about, and letting them know what you would prefer to do instead. I'm noticing that before you would submit this in 7 days, and now it's more than 10. I understand maybe the caseload has changed. If it's gonna take 10 days, can you let me know by day 7? Okay, that's an example of telling somebody what you would prefer instead. Using I or me statements, such as when you do blank, I feel blank. This helps eliminate the accusatory nature. When this happens, I feel this. Voice, tone, eye contact, body posture are also important in assertive communication. We mentioned on one of the first slides that body language is communication. So you really want to be paying attention to what your posture is, what your posture might be signaling, what your tone might be signaling, your eye contact. If you're not making eye contact, if you're looking down, that might be signaling some passive communication.
We have a question in the chat.
Yeah, the methods you introduced here is for a colleague to call. This is for everyone. This is just general assertive communication. You know, being honest is important, whoever you're speaking to, the same with being appropriate, respectful, and direct. So this can be used for anyone. No problem. Using a steady and calm voice, standing or sitting up straight, looking the other person in the eyes without glaring, right? You're making eye contact, but you're not looking at them in a way that might feel uncomfortable or unsafe. And then feelings are usually one word: angry, anxious, happy, sad, hurt, frustrated. So when we use the statement in the first bullet, when you do blank, I feel angry, versus I feel like you don't care. I feel like you don't care is not a feeling, okay? And if you need some support with being able to identify feelings words, if you go to feelingswheel.com, there is a wheel there with a bunch of different feelings words. And that's a really great place to start if you want to build up on that vocabulary. And then lastly, it can be helpful to rehearse. If you know that you're gonna have a hard conversation, maybe on your drive in, your commute, you know, writing out talking points can be really helpful, but this takes practice. It's not something that just because now you have the acronym, tomorrow you're going to be perfect at. It might take some trial and error to figure out what feels best for you, but it's okay to rehearse and it's okay to practice. Checking for understanding. So one way to do this is to repeat back what you understood. So I'm hearing you say that you want to hear some examples of how supervisors can foster assertive communication in their employees. Right? She's nodding her head. I'm not sure if you can see her, but that means that I understood what her question was or what her comment was. You can also say, can you say back to me what you just heard? So that you can ensure that the person heard you correctly and interpreted what you said correctly. Okay? Waiting your turn, trying not to speak over each other. It's going to be really helpful. Rephrasing or paraphrasing what you've heard when responding. So even if you're not necessarily saying, hey, I want to make sure that this is what I heard, or this is what you're saying, before you respond, if you say, so you're saying this in a slightly different way, that's really helpful for the other person because they can say, wait, no, that's not what I said, or yes, you're tracking. And it also helps them feel like you're listening and you're able to understand what they're saying. You're listening and before you're responding, and you're not just waiting to respond. And then asking open-ended questions designed to elicit additional information. Open-ended questions versus yes or no questions. Yes or no questions don't really provide extra information. Open-ended questions allow people to elaborate a little bit more. All right, so I'm gonna pause here. Were you able to think of an example?
Yes, although I feel like some of these other phrases kind of
answer that?
help to answer.
Okay.
this, like,
Okay, no problem. Any questions on Zoom? Or do you have any questions? I'm gonna stop sharing and stop